Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 45. My guest in this episode is Michelle E. Dickinson. And Michelle is a resilience coach and workplace mental health strategist. She's also a TEDx speaker and a published author of a memoir entitled Breaking Into My Life. And Michelle and I have a really productive conversation, but I will attach just a minor caveat that in the beginning we do talk about family dysfunction, mental health, and child psychological abuse. So it's not necessarily a trigger warning, but just a sensitivity warning that the first 10 minutes or so we deal with some tough issues, but then we move on to a really productive conversation. So I encourage you to join us, and I thank you very much for your presence in this conversation. And if you have any comments, you can leave them below. And of course, there'll be relevant social media and website links for Michelle's work and access to Michelle in the description field of the video. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to welcome Michelle E. Dickinson to the IdeaCast interview series. And I've been looking forward to our conversation. And I know it's going to be an impactful conversation because we're going to cover some things that on the surface seem kind of heavy and a lot of people deal with it, but it's such a rich territory to explore. So if YouTube audience are coming here for the first time and they're just beginning that journey, I think this is going to be a good conversation for them, or for folks who have been immersed in this kind of survivor, recovery, triumph kind of scenario that we can hope for in our lives when we do have difficult pasts. And so, Michelle, welcome. I wanted to just tie in this little bit of a caveat to that because I love tough conversations, and so I'm really looking forward to diving into the terrain and seeing what we can talk about today. So, welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Justin. I love that you found me and that you're willing to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's I certainly don't. You would probably know the statistics, like children that grow up in not only dysfunctional households, but this specific kind of targeting that goes on. And you were the subject of a very sort of convergent targeting of behavior, and you were the recipient of that behavior. And I have a similar story, and I'm going to downplay it because it parallels a lot with what you're saying. But I came through a similar situation with somebody who was dealing maybe with dark vulnerable triad traits. I don't know. I can't retroactively diagnose them. But anyway, parent that had, when you were talking in some of your interviews and discussions, a lot of things came up for me. So I can relate. And so, but I would like you, if you could, to let the YouTube audience know a little about your history and what we're talking about right now and all those things. So
Yeah.
I'll hand it off to you then.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, again, thanks for having me. My name is Michelle Dickinson. I'm a workplace mental health strategist and a resilience coach. What I get to do every day is I work with organizations to help them bolster resilience and elevate compassion in the workplace for people who are struggling, and that's a lot of people coming out of the pandemic. I do this work because mental illness has literally been the tapestry of my life. Growing up with my mother, who was bipolar disorder, had bipolar disorder, I cared for her. I witnessed the mania. I witnessed the depression. It was extremely challenging. It shaped me, taught me compassion firsthand. But then also was diagnosed myself with depression quite a few years ago, going through a life event. As an adopted daughter, I never expected that I would be dealing with depression, but going through a painful divorce, I found myself dealing with a lot. So I was diagnosed with depression. And then I also, I worked a corporate job for about 20 years. And in my last company, I was helping the organization to build the fastest growing global mental health employee resource group, which was a huge tool in elevating the conversation around mental health and removing stigma in the workplace. So that was a tremendous experience, taught me a lot. And found myself on the TED stage telling my story. After many, many years of not talking about it. And I just became very connected to wanting to do more with my story. So that inspired me to leave the corporate world and start my own company, Trifecta Mental Health, where that's the work that I'm doing right now, and truly fulfilling work, but meaningful work, and work that I think is really needed now.
Absolutely. So a question that came to mind as you were sharing your background and bio, you were essentially a child caregiver. You were in a so for people who had narcissists for parents, as narcissist codependent, I don't know what the relationship is when you have a bipolar parent, what the child is, what they're, if there's a term for what the child's doing, but is caregiver a fair term, I guess, for
Yeah, for
that?
sure.
And
Yeah.
so and so as you in your formative years, as you came out of it, and I'm relating this to what I have heard anecdotally from others and my own personal experience. What were your late teens and early 20s like, if you could relate that to the YouTube audience, having gone
Yeah.
through that role and it was the only role you knew as a child?
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. And for me, it was all about survival, finding ways to have my needs met, whether it was through the mother of a girlfriend or a grandmother or an aunt. It was finding the love and the support from those people who were present. My mom spent a lot of time in a psych ward. And unfortunately, when she was home, she was constantly battling the highs and lows of bipolar disorder. So, survival, I guess, I learned to, find things that would distract me, find love wherever I could, and connection wherever I could. And, just do the best I could. But yeah, my mom, she was oftentimes not sick enough to be hospitalized, but not well enough to be alone. So there were weeks when I would stay home from school because my father just couldn't leave her alone and he had to go to work. So it was witnessing the deep depression and witnessing the emotional journey with her, really feeling that energy and being in the space with her. That was my adolescent and childhood.
Um, and I don't know if this is going too far into personal history, but when a, a person is dealing with the peaks and the troughs of bipolar, were there ever conversations, or so was there ever a calm in the seas where the your parent, your mother, would be contrite or apologetic for what was going on? So I'm sorry that it was a
Yeah.
train wreck yesterday, or was there an amnesia
Yeah.
there with that? And I asked this out of
Yeah.
curiosity.
Yeah, no, no, no. It's very interesting. I think a lot of us kids of parents with mental illness long for the apology for
Mm,
the behavior. I longed for it myself, but it never came. My
okay.
mom did have like that amnesia, like, what are you
Okay.
talking about? Oh, today we're just happy. So like enjoy it. you know?
Yeah, my gift to you.
Right, exactly.
Okay. And that parallels the narcissism a little bit too. And again, I can only speak, from personal experience, that there was never any peace, never any kind of bridges being built. It was all very one way and asymmetrical. So, okay, good to know. Good to know. And that I'm actually having a little catharsis here myself because again, listening and researching you and your work, I just there were boxes being ticked. I almost got triggers a big word now, right? It's just like,
Whoa.
oh, memories, coming back up. And I'm not trying to make light necessarily, but we do have to laugh and we do have to have
Sure.
a sense of humor about that. And so to the YouTube audience, I'm
Yeah.
offering that. So you got into your adult years, and what do you think for you was a turnaround or the aha moment or the time where you were able to let Michelle um, understand or have the catharsis that she needed? Was there a
Yeah.
moment, rays
you
came
know,
down from the sky and stuff like that?
I found a lot of love and support in my youth group in my high school years.
Okay.
And I feel like it was really a retreat that I was on where I was able to tell the story of my mom because like a lot of people who have family members, you sort of keep that within the confines of the home. You don't really like share your laundry with the world. So
Hmm.
for me, I never spoke about it. So being able to tell what my life was like at home at that retreat was very, very helpful. And as I, got older, I just sort of was proud that I survived, like became a contributing member of society, got a job, was working, was able to sort of rise above what was a really challenging childhood. And I thought, therein lies the victory, that like, look at me. I actually, got a job. My first job was at IBM. I was really proud. I was, working hard. I was able to, get the recognition for my work ethic that my father had taught me. And so that was very fulfilling. And yet, my mom was still sick, even when I was in my 20s, and I was still, concerned about her, even though I wasn't living with her.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And speaking of your dad, and again, hit the stop button if I'm going too far, but I want to, again, mostly for the sake of people who are beginning their journey of survivorship. And so for my father and I, we did have conversations about my maternal parent. And I try to say that without any charge to it. And so we shared. He was a domestic abuse survivor. I mean, he was the battered spouse in that relationship, and so it was very cathartic opening up to him about that. So was there ever that kind of communication with your father in that at all?
Yeah, so similar to your circumstance. So like my father was the son of an alcoholic.
Okay.
My father was very good at I don't know, skirting outside the issues and being busy and working and not being fully immersed in the chaos. But we did have a relationship in which we strategized together. Okay. So what kind of doctor does she need to go see? Is she taking her medicine? Is she too sick? I mean, are we going to have to go back to the hospital? So like my mother's illness sort of brought my father and I together in terms of like, we were on the same team, wanting my mom to get relief and get the help she needed. So we had a good relationship. Although when she was abusive, verbally, physically, emotionally, he was not present. And so that was hard. That was really hard to deal with because he had no idea like what was going on, like how she was and how it was affecting me. But at the same time, I was like team mom, like let's get her well,
Yeah.
Hard. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And as a daughter, you want to be the daughter that is supportive and loving, and it's really baked into our culture too. That was one of the worst things that and I am coming back to me, but I just do this for the sake of maybe bringing things out for the audiences. There is that guilt you would feel if you weren't doing that, if you weren't being there and facilitating the most unconditional love that you could possibly do, even again if it's asymmetrical. I dealt with that guilt quite a bit, but you were there and you did everything you could. I had to cut things off, so that's where the guilt, where society would say, oh, you have to love your parents unconditionally and you have to love them no matter what. And there's some real heavy duty guilt baked into that if you do have to separate yourself from one of your parents. And a lot of people do it. And I don't envy anybody starting that journey. But
Justin, just to dovetail on that, because you raise a really good point. I actually had to do my own version of that. Like, I didn't cut my mother off, but the one thing I realized was her illness was starting to compromise my mental health. So I remember going to a therapist and the therapist saying to me, you need to create boundaries. You need to recognize when you can engage in a conversation with her, when you can be there for her, and at what point it's now just completely depleting you that you have to step away. So I put those very painful boundaries in place and they were not well received, but what it resulted in was preserving my own sanity, my own mental health, because I was being sucked down and crying and being upset, and like there was nothing I can do as a caregiver. And any of the caregivers who are listening, we feel like if I just give, an extra mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, we go and we go and we go with the hope that if I just do a little bit more, they're going to be okay. They're going to turn a corner. And that doesn't happen. And what happens is we get completely depleted. So my therapist was really keen on saying, you need to learn boundaries. You need to distance yourself. And there's going to be a backlash. So be prepared. And there was.
Okay. Did that lead to total estrangement, or was
Yeah.
there this tentative truce kind of?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was hard at first. She learned to accept what I would give her, basically.
Okay.
Like it sort of shifted to be a little bit more on my terms instead of her dictating what the relationship would be like and how much she would take from me.
Okay. Okay. And thank you so much for the disclosure, because again, my intention is that if there are people coming to this conversation, that it may initiate something for them. And I think that would be
Sure.
wonderful, to help to be there to midwife that kind of thing,
Yeah,
for people.
yeah.
So it led you to writing a book called Breaking Into My Life. And that first boundary setting procedure that was obviously a step of breaking into your life, right?
Yeah,
And sort of
exactly.
emancipating yourself from what you were uh, uh, beset with in your childhood, I guess.
It's very interesting because like the story of my mother really, so like my mother passed away probably when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, something like
Okay.
that. I can't even remember now. That's
Hmm.
what happens when you get old. So
Guilty.
so I always had in my mind I wanted to write the story of my mom because I knew
Hmm.
that it could make a difference, but I never felt the ability to do that while she was alive.
Mm.
There was, it was almost like we always walked on eggshells. We didn't want to be the cause of another nervous breakdown. So I
Mm.
certainly did not want to be the cause of a nervous breakdown if I was writing about her. So
Yeah.
I waited until after she had passed away and I never spoke about her. So there's a lot of shame associated with having a parent that has had so much um, challenge around their mental health, has been hospitalized, has undergone shock therapy. It was something I never really spoke about. It wasn't like I was like openly talking about it. But what happened was at work, a colleague of mine found out about the story. We were talking about it, and she was like, you really should consider telling your story because it could make a difference. And so before I know it, she nominates me to tell my story on the TED stage. We had a
Oh.
TEDx stage. So that led me to tell the story and to recognize the power storytelling has about pulling people out of the shadows to talk about something that's so uncomfortable but yet incredibly relatable. So it was the TED talk that was the catalyst for the book. The TED talk was really, oh my goodness, I have something to say, I have something that matters, and I have something that can make a difference for someone else. And after that 10-minute talk, I was like, well, if I could do this in 10 minutes and reach these people, I could do the same in a book. So that's when I sat down to write the memoir and really go into the details of that experience to humanize mental health and to really have people with me on the journey of loving my bipolar mother and how it shaped me and even the good that came out of it. So yeah, so it took me 4 long, very cathartic years to write that book, but I'm really glad that I did.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would think so. And the world will be better for it, of course. Again, this is a tool in somebody's toolbox that they can use for mirroring and salience and recognition. Because I think a lot of times children of these life event scenarios, or whatever you want to call it, there's self-blame, there's self introspection, that that you project back. The real issue is projected incorrectly back onto yourself, and then that can lead to abuse and other ancillary mental health issues, and like drug use and things like that, to try to numb it out and get it past. So yeah, putting a book out and telling the story, and I think the availability of this narrative is good medicine for people. And one of the things I think you said during your TED talk that I found very powerful, speaking of good medicine, is that and it may not have been your TED talk, so I apologize ahead of time, but you had said that you learn to be empathetic, and you learn to recognize your mother as still being a whole and souled human being, a person that it was a human being just dealing
Yeah.
with these things, and that I love, because I think that's a very important message. I think it's part of stages of recovery, if you will,
Yes.
and getting to where
Yeah.
you should perhaps feel best about the situation. So
Yes.
yeah, so the fact that you include that, I think, is very important too.
But that, so for people who are listening who are like, I don't know how you got there, the reality is it didn't come easy. I spent many, many years angry, resentful, just plain old mad at my mom for how her illness shaped me. And I had a belief inhibited me from doing things I wanted to do. Um, and then I learned to separate her from her illness
Mm,
so I could love her and hate her illness. And it was only until I was able to step out of the focus of being at the effects of her abuse to, recognizing what life might have been like for someone living her experience was when I could find compassion for her experience, and not solely focus on the impact her illness was having on me. And that came with a lot of self-discovery work, a lot of therapy, a lot of I did quite a few self-awareness programs to really understand and unpack that, and forgive her and forgive the illness. It's not it's so easy to be victim and to focus on what they do, and they're mentally ill.
mm,
But you really got to get that. Really have to, like, it took a lot for me to get there. It didn't happen overnight. For anyone who's in that space that is just, there's no way I can forgive, there's no way I can separate. It took really a lot of work for me to get there, and it's worth it because I have a degree of peace about it.
yeah, they say that about forgiveness, right? That you are forgiving for your sake and not necessarily for the other party's sake, and I agree with that. And one thing that I in my mental cache that helps me is there was a photograph of my mother when she was probably about 4 years old, and she had her little teddy bear, Abe Lincoln, she called her teddy bear. I remember this as a child. And even as a child, seeing that photograph, I connected with the person within the monster,
Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
person that could do horrible things. And
Right.
and yeah, it's just such a heart opening image, and that helps me preserve the humanity. And this parent hasn't passed away yet, and I'm not sure what that's going to look like when they do pass away. But it keeps the humanization there, and it keeps me feeling empathetic because I've sort of let go of other things that I could be angry and carry around, but
Yeah.
just having that empathy. And there's also a Mary Cassatt painting of a child looking sort of side profile, and that reminds me of my mother too. So I see the beauty and the innocence of the child, and that
Yeah.
helps anchor the means to be empathetic
Yeah.
and not hold anybody accountable, because I understand the history of that person, and there was deep pathology there, that both her parents were
Yeah.
monsters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They psychologically tortured me as a child. So I can imagine what they did to her for
Wow.
decades. So, but anyway, I say that
Yeah.
again as an offering to the audience, is see your parent or see the
Yeah.
abuser as a child, and knowing that
Yes.
they were in a dark room with bad people maybe and bad
Yeah.
things and stuff. Anyway, um,
And they are the product of their parents, right? Like, it's very easy to blame your parents, but you have to recognize they're not standalone people. They came from their own host of hurdles and challenges, just like you mentioned. Like my father, you know, I loved my grandmother. She was an abusive alcoholic, right? Like, so that shaped him. Same thing, with my mother. She did the best she could with what she knew and her circumstances. So, like, we always have to have that love and compassion and understanding that people, they do the best with what they know, with the circumstances they have, and some have a mental illness on top of that. So, like, I don't know, try to find the grace and the compassion.
For sure, for sure. And therapy. You had mentioned seeing a therapist, and I did it
Sure.
the hard way. I partied like a rock star to try to get rid of all that stuff. And my father told me once, he goes, there are people who are abused who blame the world, and there are people who take it out on themselves. I chose to take it out on myself, and I did a good job. But it was a learning experience, and like I
Yeah,
said, I hopefully I garnered a little bit of wisdom for all the expense,
there you
and
go.
got through it. I don't recommend it though. Go see a therapist, or certainly don't blame yourself. Don't blame the world. There's no blame. This I don't think there is any blame, especially mental health. And even in the case that I present, where it may have been narcissism or a sort of a dark, what do they call it? Covert narcissism, where it's very negatively inverted narcissism. It's something that they just aren't in control of, and so you can not assign blame by way of knowing that whether it's subclinical or deeply pathological, that, like you said, they're doing their best. They are operating as best they can, and it may not show, but that's
Yeah.
one thing you can grant them, is that they probably, and I grant that parent all the due accolades for having, she was a single mother because my father ran away and she had to raise me, and so she did a great job, to say that she kept food on the table, kept me clothed and housed, and made sure I went to school and all these things. So nothing but high marks for that. So again, I say that to the audience, that there is an inventory you can take, hopefully, and find the silver linings in any kind of negative relationship. I think some exceptions, of course, some outliers there. So the book came out, and the reception of the book, there were probably people who reached out to you and said, just like
Yes.
this conversation, I hope we get comments in the comments thread. Oh, thank you. But so
Yeah.
so it was received well.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I still get comments from people that reach out to me and go, "Oh my goodness, like you speak my truth. You put into words my experience." I think the most moving reach out that I got was early on after I released the book, was from a little girl who was 15,
Ooh.
who said, "I read your story and my mom is bipolar, and your story just gave me hope that I'm going to be okay."
Mm.
Like, oh my goodness.
Get the hanky out.
Seriously. I
Thank
mean,
you.
I was so wow. Like I would never have thought a 15 or 16-year-old would get their hands on it and be able to see their story. But like it's so I'm so moved by every single person who's reached out, every comment people leave on Amazon. Um, it was a labor of love. It was 4 long, cathartic years, a lot of crying, a lot of unearthing of emotions, a lot of reliving horrible experiences. But I always knew the end game was I would reach somebody who needed to hear and be validated in their journey, and make a difference. That was my whole goal with the book.
Yes, yes. Were there any of your immediate family members that read the book, and what was did they get the opportunity to read it and give you feedback on it?
Yeah, yeah, it's so funny. Like my godmother played a very instrumental role. My godmother and my grandmother played very instrumental roles in my childhood, and like they remembered it was, walk almost down memory lane. They remembered the things that I remembered, and um it was pretty cool. It was very cool. And then all the people that I recognized in the book, because many people helped me along the way, including my very first boss I worked for at a restaurant. Like when I was in high school, where I was looking to escape my home life, and like I would go to work at that restaurant and he would praise me for my contribution, and I wasn't even getting acknowledged at home. So like he was really like feeding me what I was missing, didn't even know it. So like I sent him a copy. I sent people, everybody who was in the book, I actually sent copies to, because I really wanted them to get the contribution they made to my life. So yeah, it was pretty fun experience to be able to do that.
That's awesome. That's really beautiful. And so moving into more recent history, you are, as you mentioned in the beginning, you're a resiliency coach. And so let's define resiliency in coaching, or what that mechanism looks like versus some of the other types of coaching strategies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to you have so many people who have emerged from the pandemic. They might not be mentally ill, but they're just feeling fatigued emotionally. I feel like they have like emotional drag, like they're just not 100%. So what I do with my clients in resiliency is we're talking about what are your daily habits and strategies that can help you feel good every day. Like don't wait until you hit a crisis. Don't wait until you burn yourself out. Like what are tangible things you could be doing every single day to just preserve your emotional well-being and feel good and elevate your energy. There are little things. So I really am all about empowering people and reminding them that small micro changes can really yield profound differences in how they're doing and how they're feeling, and ultimately prevent any type of mental health crisis, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you do the coaching, is it a sort of a spectrum of one-on-one to group coaching? So you go into workplace environments and maybe address 10 or 15 people, or where are you with that?
So what I typically do in the workplace is I have interactive workshops where we're walking through strategies. We're talking about different common themes that have surfaced that people struggle with. That's the workshop format. But when I'm doing my coaching, it's one-on-one. It's very customized. It's very much aware of what they're struggling with, like what's working, what's not working. Let's look at what's not working. So it's both. The group is more so workplace resiliency, and then the one-on-one is really, let's focus on just you.
Okay. And does that also convert to workplace or to, say, corporate consultancy? Are you a hired consultant for that too?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because when we talk about mental health, we have to look at cultures. We have to look at what cultures are currently feeling and looking like these days. Elevating compassion is something I am so passionate about, because if you have leadership and people leaders on board to really understand the whole idea of, leading with empathy and compassion, bolstering trust between you and your staff, then you set yourself and your culture up for maximum engagement and performance. And at the end of the day, who doesn't want healthy employees that are engaged and performing and everyone's winning?
For sure. Absolutely. The one or two classes I took in community college, there was a business theory class, and the one takeaway I had from it was there was theory X management and theory Y management, and theory X was leadership through coercion and intimidation, basically, and which was the old motto. It was like Bob Cratchit and that kind of stuff, and Ebenezer Scrooge. But there was also the theory Y management, and even at 18 or whatever, when I was taking the class, I thought, well, gosh, it's a no-brainer. You want an environment like you just said. You're nurturing. And you're not coddling anybody, but you're getting the best out of people because they're in a healthy environment. So here's to that. Here's to more of it. So in your experience and exposure, is the corporate ecosystem in overall, like, in that direction, moving in that direction, evolving in that direction away from?
Yes.
Okay.
It's amazing to see. I mean, if you just pop into LinkedIn, you'll see there's so much conversation happening around emotional well-being and prevention of burnout, and talking, like, let's just talk about it. It's okay to not be okay. Like, you see it all over. It's really inspiring, because before this pandemic, I felt like, we were sort of the fish swimming upstream, like before the pandemic. But then the pandemic hits, and people who had never experienced anxiety or depression are suddenly confronted with that. So with more and more people affected, or knowing someone who has been affected, it's turning up the volume, and the leaders of organizations recognize we got to do more than just hand an employee an 800 number and look the other way. Like, we have to do more. Like, what do our benefits look like? And how are our leaders engaging with their people? And do our leaders model good mental health hygiene? Are they openly talking about, like, the importance of burnout prevention and boundaries and work-life balance? Are they doing that? So they're seeing the importance. And then it's also too about being a competitive market. If you want the good talent, you want to be able to say, we are an environment that openly embraces and, supports people at any stage of their life. Like, life events come along, and we're an organization that's committed to our people. So there's this drive to be more competitive and be a more desirable place to work, because our younger generation is demanding workplaces that honor that balance, that create that space, that have no problem providing benefits that, are going to support mental health. So I love it. And even my existing corporate clients, I'm so in awe by them. Like they are so in touch with the pulse of the organization that they're checking in with their people. They're doing engagement assessments to see like how are they feeling? What do they want? Like, I mean, it's deeply inspiring, and it's truly an honor to get to work with companies that are really doing that and stepping up.
I bet. I bet. And it makes me hopeful because and I had a well, there's two things. I guess I'll pin one thing, and my last person that I interviewed was a millennial, and we were talking a little bit, and one praise that I was lauding on, you and I are in the same generation, and so I was saying to this person that young corporations, by young I mean young executives, are seeing this, and so the seemingly deep frivolity that our generation or boomers might see in having a smoothie shop or a beanbag lounge with hammocks and maybe hoops or whatever in an office corporate environment makes perfect sense to me, because there is such a thing as serious play. And if you're grinding something out, you're deeply involved in logic, and then you pull back and you go shoot some hoops or play a pinball game and have a smoothie, you're going to break away from something that will give you a reframing, I think. And so there's nothing but, I could go too far, like you get a bunch of people sitting around all day not being productive, but that I know can be governed and regulated.
Right.
But the
Right.
idea that you could, take 10 minutes out of your cubicle or wherever you are, or your computer, and just go and refresh and have a little sugar or a little protein, and then
Yep.
play for a minute. But while you're playing, you're resetting things, and your perspectival awareness is changing or whatever. So I love that idea. I think
Yeah.
that's just so rich, and I really hope that that's the way of the future. So I'll unpin the other part that I was going to respond to from what you said was, I wonder if this will filter down to sort of service labor, semi-skilled labor. That is an often unnoticed or undernoticed aspect of this kind of talk, where people who are making sort of minimal pay bands or earning in pay brackets that are lower and not necessarily considered to be vital. I wonder if there'll be a future for that as far as this kind of
I think
thinking.
so. I mean, it's interesting. I think so. I think just based on, the organizations that have had me in to talk about resiliency, I'm really like optimistic. I delivered my resilience program to wait staff and bartenders at a restaurant. I delivered it to truck drivers in the port of Newark, New Jersey,
Mm.
and I think our leaders in every like profession and level are getting the value of having mentally healthy employees, and it's inspiring. I mean, it is where we are, and the pandemic has shined a light on it, and so you sort of can't unsee the need, and so yeah, I think sky's the limit where our leaders really start to take this into account in terms of the overall employee.
Is there management training for leadership to recognize signs in the
Yeah.
environment, in the office ecosystem, for that potential for someone? Because there was a statistic
Yeah,
in one of your websites saying 1 in 5 people are dealing with mental health in the workplace, and that's
absolutely.
significant. I assume this is coming along for the system, is to have folks on the
Yeah.
management end of things aware,
Yeah.
right? Looking for
Yeah.
that.
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting that I didn't think of this sooner. So when I was in my former corporate job, I was diagnosed with depression. I mentioned that when
Mhm.
I introduced myself, and I disclosed that to my boss, and my boss was so insensitive to me. And now I was working in an organization where we had a remit that we were going to be inclusive, compassionate,
Mhm.
stigma free, all of these things. And my immediate boss was not compassionate to me. And so I sort of like used that for fuel to start my company and then let it go. During the pandemic, I had developed the resilience workshop for employees. I was delivering it virtually to all different kinds of organizations, from the food and beverage industry to the biotech to the big pharma. I was delivering that, and the feedback I got from every one of my clients was, this is great for employees, but here's the problem we have. Our leaders, we have such trepidation. They are not comfortable engaging in conversations around emotional well-being, right? These are leaders who maybe have some emotional intelligence training, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
So they really asked and demanded that we get our leaders on board. So that was when I built my leader training. And the leader training is specifically geared to empower leaders and have them have the courage to engage safely in a conversation if they notice a shift in behavior. And that really has made a difference for organizations, because the leaders now are aware of their role and what they can do. And you have less leaders looking the other way because it's uncomfortable. You've gotten them now more comfortable engaging and talking and saying, okay, well, are you aware of the resources? And and just listening, which is by far one of the most important things leaders can do. I say it all the time. Generous with your listening can make all the difference.
Yes, yes. And when I think about leadership, and I say this with zero judgment, that sort of there is a competitive drive, there's a personality type, there is the extroverted nature. So it really does take a bit of conditioning, if it's in your nature to be sort of a go-getting, aggressive kind of person, to allow for this type of recognition and allow for this type of interaction. So when you mentioned that your previous boss had responded less than desirably about that, it made me think, well, I'm going to steel man their position and say, well, they're that. I go as far as sometimes this is evidenced in I think psychological literature, is that attorneys and doctors are high functioning sociopaths, and they are, and I don't say sociopath in judgment. It's just they are in their nature just more about cutting to the chase and doing things rather than dwelling on sort of the emotional and psychospiritual aspects, like you and I might do. So I have a friend who just became a physician. He just got out of med school. He's in his third year of residency. He was telling me last year a story about physicians have to receive that emotional intelligence screening, and so it's an empathy test, and they have to sort of pass that empathy test to move forward. It's not going to derail their career, but it makes all the sense in the world, because you can have doctors with good bedside manners, and then you can have physicians that may not be caring enough, and they may be too much of it. There's that show on Netflix. Oh, Doc Martin. I don't know if have you ever seen that or heard of it? He's that way. He just has no personality, no bedside manners. He'll tell you straight to your face, horrible things. And so anyway, to stop meandering so much, it fascinated me that they have this screening test that they put people through. But then I was thinking, well, if you're a really good sociopath, you're intelligent enough to just fudge it, and feign sort of a performative empathy, just to get through.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect, but yeah, it's good to know that that is brought along as part and parcel of this shift and this transformation. And like you said, COVID has really kicked the barn door open and let a lot of things out, starting with all of us. Some of us might have been masquerading as doing well, and when this pressure came on board, it really pushed people. And I say that out of compassion, because maybe it was a good thing to get the mask off and work with some stuff, and so that going and coupling, and one more thing, and then coupling that with the having to work at home. There's been so much shift and change in the workplace, I would think.
And what I see mostly in my practice working with companies and different employees is that a lot of times people are diminishing how they're doing. But just because everyone's like, well, we all went through this. What do I have to complain about? I'm good. I have a job. I didn't lose a loved one. I'm good. I have no business complaining. And the problem with that diminishing of how you're really doing is that you start to just live a very dull, you have a very dull experience. You've lost your joy. You've lost your energy. You have that drag going on, and that's no way to live. That's no way to live. I'm a stand that people recognize how they're doing, be courageous enough to look in the mirror and say, I am not who I know I can be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get myself back there, and I'm not going to step over it anymore. And that's the biggest challenge I see. People go, well, we're all in the same boat. No, we're actually same ocean, very different boats based on our own past traumas. And people need to get that.
And cultural backgrounds and advantages and disadvantages and all
Totally.
these myriad of things that can play
Yeah.
into it. Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't homogenize this.
No.
So what are your thoughts, like getting back to COVID for a minute and sort of the whole market and enterprise system being shaken up by it, and home office or just homework versus office work. I was going to say home office, but it's more like your living room. But where do you think things are going to settle out in the next few years? Are we going to all sort of resume going back to the office per se, or do you think there's some wisdom in having people work remotely? What are your feelings on that? It's
Well,
kind of
I
an
think, yeah, I think that, first and foremost, we're never going to go back to the way things were.
Mhm.
And that's something I think leaders are grappling with. They want it to be the old way it was, right? They
Mhm.
want it to be where everyone's in the office, they're commuting around the coffee room or water cooler, there's the informal gatherings. I think we are now in a new world and we have to look at what works and what doesn't work. So I can't begin to imagine that organizations, they will lose people if they start to say you absolutely must be in 5 days a week. So I think we have to look at sort of right now with the great resignation going on, the people really are more present around what matters. Like we have been so forced to look at our lives and say these are things that matter to me, and commuting for 3 hours a day doesn't work, and I'm going to find the opportunity that gives me the most access to the quality of the life that I now know is possible, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's going to be very interesting what unfolds. I part of a couple of different HR communities, and there's so much conversation around like the new hybrid and the new employee experience. So I don't think it's going to be very black and white. I think it's going to be, creating and building based on what works for your business.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, we're human beings and we're wired for connection and community, and that's super important. So it's like, how do you achieve that is going to be a really unique and interesting thing to witness, how companies still cultivate that but also allow that freedom.
Yeah, that is a new challenge, to have the the meeting space and the community space, but maybe virtually. And yeah, that's an interesting thought. And there's two valences to that. There's the everybody having to get along with each other kind of thing, and then there's also the celebratory, kind of like going on your break and shooting hoops or
Yeah.
playing foosball or whatever it is. That's a type of bonding and connecting that you don't get on these kind of virtual
Well,
platforms.
I have a friend who also highlighted the flip side of that, right? So when you think about bullying in the workplace, bullies can't really bully outside of the workplace. So it's a very interesting thing where people are resisting returning to the workplace. Are they resisting returning to the workplace, or are they resisting the environment where the bully was able to thrive?
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
like another whole other conversation to be had here. But like it's very that exists in the corporate world, the bullies that are able to get away with being bullies. And when you remove the whole like in-person thing, are they able to do what they have done? And is the resistance really around an employee not wanting to be subjected to that?
Yeah, the bully would have to find a new environment to occupy for that, for their
Yeah.
supply. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Which
I
is a
think it
good
takes,
thing.
yeah, I think it takes, HR leaders, it really takes a challenge for them to truly examine the resistance. What is the resistance? Like be really honest. What is the resistance and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
that's true. Dig a couple layers under and figure it out. And as you pointed out, it's I think there are certain sectors and certain disciplines that it would require teamwork in a physical sense, like certain engineering tasks and other things. But things that you can do on a computer, I would almost think that, there's a place in my little town that's kind of clever, and it's a place that you just rent out space for ad hoc meetings or get-togethers and stuff like that, and it's basically office space for rent. And so, maybe there's a time where a community of workers can get together for a day or two and confabulate and then disperse. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's hybrid opportunities. There's a spectrum of things that can be done there, and it'll be fun to see over the next maybe 5 years to see what shakes out on that and where everything settles. Hopefully for the better, but we shall see. And I guess the one nice thing is again, you and I are sort of in a similar age bracket, and so the young ones probably have more tolerance and resilience for working remotely and working in impersonal environments, because they did grow up differently than us. So child of the 70s, I grew up without computers. I grew up outside mostly and not so much immersed in on a screen. And that didn't happen until I was in my late 20s. I didn't get hip to the internet until the late 90s. So anyway, but maybe they're designed. And I say designed as in imprinted in their coming through their formative years to handle that new environment. So maybe the confluence of timing and event and actualization of events might work for people under 40 to transition to that. Whereas again, leadership might be in their 50s and late 40s, and like you said, the old paradigm, and we got to get back to that. And so yeah, it's curious to know how that may shake out. Now, you had mentioned in a couple of conversations and interviews something called Clubhouse, and was that something that was really good and beneficial for the COVID times, like the last couple of years?
Yeah. Clubhouse was something that I personally plugged into to not feel so isolated. I was, I work alone from home, and so right around, I want to say, in the winter of COVID, I was feeling pretty disconnected, and a friend of mine introduced me to Clubhouse, and Clubhouse was an amazing forum where you just sort of plug in and connect live with people on a common topic. And so for me, it was great because we were talking about meaningful things. We were talking about mental health. We were also you could also connect on any other topics that were available. So it was really a platform for connection at a time when we felt very disconnected, being in quarantine. So for me, it was for my mental health, to be totally honest, was just to have a connection and meet new people in a way that I wasn't able to out in the world because we were all under lockdown.
Okay. And I may have missed it. Was Clubhouse a script format, or was it video, or was it a multi?
No, Clubhouse is it's an app that is voice. It's a voice.
Oh, okay.
So basically you go into you can't see because of my screen. You go into different rooms. You can go into different rooms, and there's people in these rooms like Damon John from the Shark Tank was in. I had interviewed Forbes Riley because I heard her speaking. Les Brown had been in the rooms, popular people. Gary Vaynerchuk, if you're an entrepreneur, you know who he is. He was in rooms.
Okay.
And you could go into the big celebrity rooms, or you could go into the little intimate rooms where they were talking about really specialized topics. So it's all voice. You're in a room and you raise your hand to speak, and they give you the floor, and then you go back and then you just listen. It's really cool.
Okay. And I like that. That ties in nicely with what we've been streaming on, and the idea of isolation versus connection, and the new normal in work environments. And so little things like that are going to, I assume, fit in with the new normal. Now, there was something else I discovered on one of your websites, and it was called Protecting Our Happy. Did you want to talk about that too? And
that is, yeah. So I coined my resilience program, Protecting Our Happy, because at the end of the day, people are looking for ways to restore their joy and restore their happy. So I coined it Protecting Our Happy because it's basically what I do. I teach these resilience strategies and tips to really protect your joy and your happiness and get back to that point where you're feeling good.
Very nice. Very nice. What big, bold fearless ambitions do you have for the future? Like, what if you could wave your magic wand, what would you love to do beyond the resilience coaching and the workplace resilience training? Would you go for a hat trick of things to do, or or trade those in for something even grander? I mean, what's a big picture thing that you flirt with in your imagination?
I'm all about impact, Justin. I think about the ripple effect that I can cause in one-on-one coaching. And I love that because more times than not, what I'm sharing, whether it's in my coaching or my workshops, that trickles to the home, and that I know makes a difference for far beyond the person that I'm speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say impact, like my audacious goal for this year, which I think I'll probably reach, is to touch 10,000 lives. So that could be through podcasts, coaching, workshops, public speaking. My big goal, I want to be on stages sharing this with a lot of people. So
Wow.
I have a couple of really awesome opportunities coming up where I'll be at a convention in Atlantic City, on the stage of the Borgata. That has me very excited. Talking to educators and superintendents. That's a very exciting opportunity. But ultimately, it would be being on bigger stages and touching the lives of more people and reminding them of their own power and the simplistic things that they can be doing to feel good.
I love that. I love that. One of my remote fantasies that I have is to be an organizer of something very similar to what you said, and maybe a 2-day conference where you do bring speakers in, whether virtually or on the stage, and just sharing ideas, sharing thoughts in the vein that you operate in, and as well as innumerable other things. It could be philosophical, it could be, whatever. But just all positive valence, all about well-being enhancement, or transcendence into a greater expression kind of thing. But keep it grounded and keep it in a manner that's palatable to a broad spectrum of a general audience, but nonetheless captivating. So there's, it would have to be a really neat creole of ideas and people getting together. But yeah, I would love beyond anything to just do that maybe a couple times a year and just bring in people and sell the program. And so we'll see. I'll have you on my short list of people to talk. Yeah, for sure. Because like I said, I think that, and it could be just for people who are in the biz and who do coaching and mentoring and things like that. But it could be open to anybody. And if you want to have your own personal experience, or if you want to, as you just said, make an impact, and then you as a professional, you go back out with these new ideas. You met 16 speakers that week, bought a few of their books or whatever, and you took off. And so, yeah, it's all about the radiation. And I say that I love botany, and they talk about plant species radiating out from like a progenitor species, like this one central species, and all these new things that just sort of drift out and become new species. And I think of that like in the mimetic sense, in the social thought virus sense, where we just share ideas, and they can be light or dark, but if you get together and you work more towards cultivating the light ideas, and they're dispersal and being sent out into the world and received and as you said, enfolded into other relationships. That's just so powerful. Yeah, that's very powerful. For sure. Well, I'm going to have all of your contact information down below for our YouTube audience to gain access to your work and to hopefully engage you if the need is there. Whether it's something as subtle as resiliency coaching, or to find your book and discover it and begin that healing journey of survivorship versus being the victim of something that happened in the past. And it's not an easy journey, and it takes a certain amount of love for yourself, and that's in its own right a journey yeah. We could have a whole nother hour of conversation with that. So, but I deeply appreciate you being transparent and being vulnerable to share your story, and having the courage to put it into a book and share that with the world, and the positive outcomes that have been coming from that book are what the world could definitely use. And by the world, I mean all of us. So I very much appreciate you doing that. Not that you need my blessing or consent for that, but it's nice.
No, that's nice. Yeah, it's nice to hear. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Give each other little pats on the back, right? So I give you a virtual little pat on the back for that, because again, I have a very parallel, very mirrored narrative, and I survived it, and you survived it, and and that's why I do what I do with this interview series. Is I draw no revenue from it. It's just a hobby of mine, but it's a hobby inspired by my wanting to impact other people positively and share stories like yours with, at this time, admittedly, a somewhat limited audience. But there's over 1,000 people in my little social media system. So I mean, people will discover, and it has its own discovery. That's what I love about YouTube. The right tags or whatever will lead to discoveries. So yeah, but Michelle, I really do appreciate your company today and co-creating this conversation. I think it was wonderful. And to the YouTube audience, those of you, I always joke at the end of these interviews, we capture about 10% all the way to the end. And so to the 10%ers, I much love to you guys, because long form conversation, stepping out of ADD long enough to really immerse yourself into a dialogue. It takes some discipline in its own right. So much love to you guys for sticking around. And Michelle, maybe I'll check in with you on that stage presentation if I ever actualize my my remote aspirations. So we'll see. But again, thank you so much. And Breaking Into My Life is her book. Again, all relevant information will be down below in the description field. And again, Michelle, any last words you want to share before we sign off? Parting thoughts.
I would say have the courage. If you have been affected like you and I have the courage to do the work to free yourself, because you deserve it. You deserve it. You have one precious life. Like, you totally deserve it. You get to create your future.
Amen. And I'll put one little asterisk on that it's never too late either. I'll be 53 in a couple of weeks, and there's never a bad time to start that journey. So you could be in your 70s and it's fine. Step out and get that new life going. So never use that as an excuse to not want to break out of your shell and have your chrysalis. So, again, Michelle, thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation. I'll say goodbye to you after we stop the record of this conversation. Awesome. But to the YouTube audience, again, thank you very much for your presence and participation. If you want to drop a comment, something that may have come up for you in the conversation, I'll certainly be happy to relay that to Michelle. She also has her email address on her website that you can access if you want to share an inspiring moment that might have been derived from her book or even from this conversation. You're more than welcome to do that. So thank you again, YouTube folks, and be well. Take care.